delivery.
You're looking for that when?
Sorry.
What number?
Just
15,
an
did you
update.
say?
This is, oh, sorry, this is in the minutes.
Yes, I added the minutes.
Sorry, I don't have a copy of the minutes.
Sorry, yeah.
in
So
front of me.
Pandora Pond update.
And the question is,
Yeah, so look, I'll need to come back to you, Councillor, on that. It was requested of the Napier City Council, and I don't have the information in front of me as to whether or not it's been provided.
So we were potentially going to have it tagged on to the front of this meeting, and then the idea was that it was then going to be incorporated into the committee update last week. So that probably hasn't happened, so the view was that we'll move it to ahead of the next Environment Services Committee meeting in November and invite Napier City to participate in a workshop session ahead of this meeting.
okay. Any other questions, matters arising?
Yeah, just
Councillor Bailey.
further from that, Ian, through you, Chair. Ian, was there any particular reason why you wanted to do that in the workshop rather than actually at a meeting where the public can hear what Napier City Council has to say?
Look, the reality is that there was expected to be quite a bit of exchange and dialogue and discussion that would potentially fill some hours of exchange between councillors and presenters. So that was, the thinking was that it would be rather than having it attached to the agenda, it would be a separate session ahead of the meeting.
Okay, I'm
Purely
just conscious that there's an awful lot of public interest in what's going on there,
Sure.
That's all. And if we have it in a workshop, of course, then that sort of precludes that involvement of the public or the public interest. But that's just, have a think about that, that's fine.
I'm a little confused. Is this to replace or in addition to the presentation that was going to be made to the Ariri Management Group?
No, so there are two things here. This committee has had for a while a request to see a presentation from the Napier City Council about its overall efforts around the estuary, and that's fallen into this process around Tikokino and the presentations that were provided last week. In addition to that, the council asked us to write specifically to the Napier City Council and ask for timelines and deliverables around their upgrade program because of concerns that the responses that had been received previously in relation to the wastewater discharges into the stormwater network had a work program associated with it that was not sufficiently specific with respect to deliverables, timelines, budgets, etc. And now that the long-term plan process was completed, Council was looking for much greater specificity around that, and that is what was requested in writing to Napier City Council, and I can't tell you whether we've received that at this point. I suspect the answer is no, but I'm happy to follow it up.
Yep, thanks, James.
Cool. Any other matters arising?
That's what I was looking at.
We'll move on then to follow-ups from the previous meeting on page 3 of your agenda. We have all sorts of responsible people here, but does anyone have any particular responsible? Any particular questions about any of these items? Not hearing any, so...
Box on.
Pardon me?
I said box on. Quick meeting's a good meeting.
We're boxing on then. We need to act on that in any way? No? Okay. Any...
Perhaps, Mr. Chair, simply updating the line item on the Pandora Pond item there. Simply update the item.
You have been updated?
Yeah, I appreciate that, but if it goes into the follow-up.
All right, okay.
I'll move the recommendation that the receive and note the report follow-ups.
I'll second it. I'll forgo my right to speak.
So what?
Do we need to accept that formally?
Yes.
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Any other matters on this page? Okay. Items not on the agenda. Does anybody have any items? Councillor Curtin.
Yes, to Committee o Te Whanga, the Ahuriri Estuary Committee report.
Ahuriri Estuary. We find the right page here.
It's on page 11.
I can't be left out. I'll report on Ruapani. On what? Ruapani.
I have two. The first one, I'll call it a Centurion gravel meeting. My second one, I'll give you an update on the Prongahu Marakiki catchment meeting.
Say the second one again.
There's a catchment meeting from Central Hawke's Bay, Marakiki, Prongahu.
Any others? I will add the Productivity Commission.
Some more on?
Okay. Is that it?
Hallelujah. Sisters and brothers.
All right. So, I think we are to Marquini and Sustainable Homes. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go for it.
Thank you. You've got a heavy agenda today. I'm taking it that everybody has read the criteria that have been circulated. I'll go through the report very briefly at the front here. Council has agreed to borrow 13 million over the next 10 years. That will allow initially at least 1,300 homes in Hawke's Bay to become more sustainable, reduce energy consumption and become more resilient in a civil emergency. The outcomes that we're looking for with the Sustainable Homes programme is that we see improved water quality resulting from the reduction of leachate from septic tanks that need replacement, and this will be evidenced by our State of the Environment quality reporting for water and the number of tanks that are actually replaced. The continued improvement of air quality. I'm delighted that this year we have again met the targets for air quality, probably thanks to the weather a little bit, but it's the second year running that we've met the targets and we're on track for 2020. Increased number of warmer, drier homes leading to improved health and reduced demand health burden. Improved civil defence resilience, increased energy efficiency and reduction in demand, and reduced dependence on networked supply for both energy and water. Any take-up of the solar parts of the Sustainable Homes programme will help to move us towards from 85% to 100% for the carbon neutral target that we have set for 2040. The intention is that the reporting on the Sustainable Homes programme be through this committee, and that Jess, as the Group Manager for Corporate Services, will provide the internal governance of the programme. The scheme, to remind you, will be fully cost recovered, and packages that we enter into an agreement with ratepayers will be paid back through a voluntary targeted rate on the property, so there is no impact on the general ratepayer. The recommendations to the E&S today are that it notes the Sustainable Homes policy and funding criteria and recommends that Council accepts the Sustainable Homes policy when it meets next and the voluntary targeted rate criteria. If that is the case and it is accepted, it is proposed to start the programme from the 1st of October. Now, I'm quite happy to go through any questions that anybody has, unless you want to go through a page at a time through the document.
Councillor Bailey.
Thanks for the paper, Mark. Much appreciated. I think it's great policy. I do have one question though. Can you just briefly run us through the criteria or the process for becoming an approved supplier for all the particular programs?
Absolutely. Yeah. With the experience that we've gained with the Heat Smart programme, we were in severe danger of becoming yellow pages for any supplier to put their name forward. And the difficult thing is to say no All right? So we've limited the Heat Smart programme to be based on the volume of work that's carried out by these people. In other words, the more they do, the more their local presence, and the more they have a history locally, that deems them appropriate to be an approved supplier. The exception to that is where we are taking expertise as part of a professional body, and you'll see on the solar one, for example, we're utilising CIANS as the professional group, and they vet their members to ensure that they are compliant with the standards that are set.
Okay, so, sorry, Chair, just to follow up from that. So if you were a supplier and you wanted to get involved with it, as long as you were doing sufficient volume in Hawke's Bay, you could put your name forward and you'd be considered for approval?
Absolutely, but I wanted to limit the numbers initially, so I've gone for known suppliers that we are already using as part of the Heat Smart programme.
Yep.
And the recommendations of the professional bodies, to pick up 4 specialists, if you like.
Yep, no, that's fine. Thanks, Mark.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you. On the same line, I'd be quite keen to see the availability of Central Hawke's Bay suppliers in the list. So if you have someone from Central Hawke's Bay wanting double glazing, would you be approachable to them using a local glazier, because there are 2 in Waipukurau?
Yeah, I'd be happy to consider them.
Yeah.
Send me the information.
Well, no, I'm not advocating anyone, but I just think locals need to be dealing locally, and so I'd like to see the opportunity for locals. And
We've had this issue with Heat Smart, particularly in Wairau, where there are no resident suppliers in Wairau, and people travel, and so consequently they have to arrange giving quotes, etc., to a number at a time, and they usually do it through their call centres and arrange both installs and quotes to be in a group when they're fairly remote. Central Hawke's Bay, not so difficult. It's not quite so far away. So the suppliers that we have, for example, on double glazing, would be quite willing to travel from Hastings, I think.
So if the locals can get a look in, that's good. My other question, and it's been pointed out to me, if, for instance, some residents in a small community, say Ongaonga, decided to install water tanks, then would there be assistance to provide the pumping and necessary setup that goes alongside the water tank to get the water into the dwelling?
That's not something that we have considered. There is a small section on the sustainable homes in the paper that Ian has later on in response to the Ongaonga inquiries. What we do have through the Sustainable Homes programme is the ability to go and potentially provide 30,000 litre support as a reserve, taking both rainwater and potentially being filled in the off-demand times for sustainability. The reticulation of a supply is really not the responsibility of the regional council, because you enter into a whole load of public health issues and the water quality and guaranteeing the water quality. So, for those that have experience, preempting a question that may come shortly, if you are attaching the supply from a water tank to the domestic supply, then it has to be fitted with backflow, etc., to prevent contamination. And there is a consenting process for anybody in Variety, for example, that may be putting 4 tanks in. There will be a consenting process through the TLA for prevention of contamination from the tank back to the reticulated supply.
So I was a little, if I could intervene here, I was a little confused by this description of that, what you just described in this paper. It wasn't clear to me whether the paper was saying, no, we will not support water storage that is intended for domestic consumption, or yes, we would, but you have to get a consent to do it. Is it the latter?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And it depends on the size of the tank as well.
Right.
So
Okay.
some of the smaller tanks, 600 litres, less of a problem. It's mainly rainwater that they'll be taking. If you're looking at a 30,000 litre tank, we, as the supplier of that tank, can't guarantee that it's a potable supply.
And are you further saying, though, that if my tank is below the level of my house and I need a pump to get it from the tank to the house, that you won't pay for the pump? Is that?
The individual is putting a package together which may be a lot of constituent parts
Right.
that are around the sustainable homes.
Mhm.
You have a ceiling of 20,000.
Yep.
Yeah. If you choose to include the cost of the pump within that 20,000, then it could be included.
Okay. I think you were next, Councillor Dick. And Peter.
Thanks, Mark. Is this program additional to the Heat Smart program?
The intention is that with the Heat Smart programme, which you will be aware was for 10 years,
Yes.
we have gone over the hump of the bell curve and the demand is starting to drop now as we're meeting the target. And the Heat Smart programme will be subsumed into the Sustainable Homes programme. So it will continue, and in the LTP we have signalled that the Heat Smart programme will finish by 2023.
So that's with its existing source of funding. It
Yep.
won't go eroding the
No.
13 million.
No, no. The Heat Smart programme will still be able to provide access to grants and loans at a subsidised rate, which is subsidised by the targeted rate in the airsheds. The benefit of the Sustainable Homes programme, including Clean Heat, is that it takes it across the region as a whole, and it does not require the replacement of an existing fire. So there are some properties that will fall under the Sustainable Homes programme that can have clean heating that would not otherwise be eligible under the Clean Heat programme.
And just to follow up, Mr. Chairman, if the demand is strong for this package of services, how are you going to allocate it out? Is it first come, first served?
Yep, it will be first come, first served. I'm anticipating that the take-up will be relatively slow to start with, and it will build, but the programme is scalable according to demand, and we will take on resource and build that resource into the payback that comes from the VTR. So it's cost recoverable, the administrative support.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Bevan.
Thanks, Chair. I've got two questions. I'd just first like to reframe the question that Councillor Hewitt asked earlier. Are you satisfied with the service providers that you're currently authorised, that you actually have full coverage of the region so that all of the people that we represent at this table will have access to those services?
All of the suppliers that are listed in the scope documents have indicated that they will work across the region.
Right. So you're satisfied we've got
Yep.
a sufficient presence for everybody to be able to access these?
But I'm
Services.
quite happy to take,
more.
people's approach
Right.
if they wish to be included.
Okay, thank you. So the second question I had was in relation to the minimum grant of $1,000, and I'm thinking there are probably quite a few houses in our region where people are being accommodated in sheds or sleep outs or whatever, and it would be desirable that those buildings were insulated, and it might be much less than $1,000 to do so, but those people can't do it themselves without this assistance, but they're excluded because of the $1,000 cap. Have you thought that through and how that's going to work in reality for some people?
I have. The $1,000 cap is a legacy from the Heat Smart programme, and the issue is why it makes it kind of difficult on a repayment thing over 10 years for less than $1,000. They're paying an undue amount of interest. I would suggest if they want to borrow $200, there are other ways of doing it rather than putting it for 10 years on your rate.
Yeah, I'm thinking somebody that wants to borrow $500 or $600 to get some bats to line a small room or something, and I'd hate them to miss out because they've got no other means of.
But I think it's worth mentioning, Peter, that the new programme that's being introduced by ECA and the Warmer Kiwi is specifically targeting mesh block areas with low income, etc. And if people are eligible for that, then the regional council is only picking up a small portion at the end when 67% is being paid by ECA, 25% is being paid by the supplier. So, they should be most of the way there.
So you're saying they've got an alternative?
Yes, absolutely.
Councillor Barker, I think you were next.
Thank you. I've got two questions. Are you familiar with the economics of deadweight loss, which is the example I think best by around working income offices where there are set suppliers and they give a set amount for, for example, loans for fridges and washing machines. It's always that the fridges and washing machines on sale are at the $400 limit or the $500 limit, and so that they're always much higher than the market. And why I'm concerned here is if you have a limited number of suppliers, which you say are approved, are they going to have the potential to exploit this preferred position to charge more than what the market would, and therefore if they're charging more than the market would, there is a deadweight loss to the consumer? How are you guarding against that?
In the same way that we have through the Heat Smart programme, in that it is recommended that anybody who is wanting to access the scheme gets more than one quote and can go out to the market to test that it isn't being, if you like, rigged by a cartel of supply. Yeah.
So that's, in addition to the list that you've got here, someone can go to roughest gut suppliers, get a quote from them, and if it's better than the ones that of the all list, they can take the...
The reason for the approved suppliers is that we are looking to quality suppliers, and the same with the Heat Smart programme. There is product that we would not recommend in terms of Energy Star rating, etc. I don't want to lend money to somebody over a 10-year time and have it fail within 2 to 3 years. So it's product and it's the quality of the installer as well.
I get that, but you caught danger here by having a restricted list, and people then are able to take advantage of that because they have a preferred position, and you prevent new entrants entering into the market, therefore putting pressure, competitive pressure on the price. That's my point.
I agree, Councillor Barker. We're also looking at it from the perspective of managing potential risk from the regional council point of view, and I think it's important that there is a quality component as assessment.
My second question is on 4.1 of your attachment, item 6. It says to be able to access the VTR funding, homeowners / ratepayers need to have a good HBRC rate payment history, fair enough, and no existing VTR. Then it goes on, VTRs can be combined by including the balance of a previous VTR. I thought, well, that's a bit contradictory. In the new single VTR, one per property, that the VTR can be sustainable homes combined up to 20,000. The point I'm trying to get to, what I would get to here is I think that's, in my reading it, contradictory. On one hand it says one and then you can combine. Well, combine is more than one. So, yeah, I'm not sure, you might want to rethink this. Would
it help if I explained it, Councillor?
Sorry, yeah, but I just want to get, the issue here though, is that it has come to my attention that people have raised with me that they have an existing program with the council, say for example for a heat pump, but their fireplace is, which they still use, is an old fireplace and needs to be replaced, but you can't get a loan for replacing the fireplace. So why have we got this policy of just having one, and then you can't have something else? So if it's, I would have thought if it's going to add to the quality of the home, reduce air pollution, et cetera, we should be encouraging it regardless of how many they've got. The question, for the issue for the council, I would have thought, is that they are continue to pay their rates of good rate history is not a burden to them, and it's everything's heading in the right direction.
Okay, I'll take the questions one at a time. The first question was, can you have more than one? And I addressed that earlier by saying if you have a sustainable homes package, it can have several constituent parts. So you can have a VTR singular on the property that covers a variety of interventions.
Right.
But the important thing is it's one VTR on the property. So you run with one. If in the event you wish to add to it, then what we do is to pay off the old one and put the balance into the new one. So there is still a singular VTR on that property. And the reason for that is it's running for a term, and we can't have multiple terms running on the same recovery. So it is combined into one. Does that make sense?
Yes, but that's not what people are being advised.
It's the advice that's being given by the Heat Smart team at the moment, and it will with the advice that's given by the Sustainable Homes team.
Well, I don't want to get people in here and get them to swear on a Bible and oath, but that's not what they've been told.
Can I just be clear on your other point, that if somebody has taken up the Heat Smart loan
Yep.
for the replacement of a fire with a heat pump,
Yep.
that fire should either have been decommissioned or removed.
Well, neither has happened,
Right. So they've had a grant or a loan for the heat pump?
as I understand it.
Okay. Can I take this offline, Mr. Chairman, and get the details of that so that I
Please
can
do.
follow it up?
Take it offline.
I think this is fascinating. I'll accept that. I've been sidelined.
Thank you. Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Mark, thank you for your paper. I've got 3 strands of questioning, if you can bear with me. Can I take you to your supplement, the policy itself, the criteria themselves? It's on page 21, or page 4 or page 21, take your pick. I'm looking at insulation on that page, and the third point down, considerations, no blown product that settles. I'm not sure what that means, but I'm sure you do. But I am interested to know the issues regarding Hastings District Council and their code. Does this criteria now exclude for insulation floors and walls and double glazing? I'm not clear what you're saying in those considerations, or does the considerations here drive our criteria?
Okay, let's take that one first. Blown product, first of all, is the stuff where they drill holes in and squirt it with an air supply. The problem, and ECA have not accepted that as a quality product because it settles and you still have cold gaps when
So
it
we're not
settles.
funding that?
No, no, we line ourselves with ECA's quality things. The second bit is regarding the discussions that we have had with Hastings District Council, where as part of their LTP submission, they actually suggested that we pay for a higher than required under the building code level of insulation, and that the regional council contribute to the cost of the top up to a higher level than required. That isn't something that we entertained doing, but we did say that we would work very closely, and we are working closely with Hastings District Council with regard to a position that they are looking to appoint of an energy advisor. So this person will go and visit a property, talk to the owners of the property, and recommend those interventions that are going to have the greatest impact and payback for their particular property. So it's a customised service, so we can fit in behind that.
Okay, just moving on, Mr Chair, further down under water storage and septic tanks on that same page, probably the line item I'm looking at, the whole purpose of the approach is to capture local rainfall for non-potable purposes, but I understand from you that the scheme also applies to non-rainfall sources, is that correct?
That's correct.
Able to store...
Taking the example that will probably come up later in this meeting, there is the possibility that you could fill a 30,000 litre tank from your bore supply,
yes,
and store it for when the bore may be dry.
Sure. Following on from the Chair's earlier question, though, as to the extent of the funding available, we talked in reference to pumps, and we've got a paper later today about the water supply in Central Hawke's Bay. Does the scheme apply to refurbishment or deeper drilling of existing wells?
I hadn't considered, Councillor Curtin, the cost of drilling to be included in the Sustainable Home Programme. I think that's a separate issue. I think the water storage tanks are something that we could assist with.
Sure. So what I'm seeing is the policies applying to the storage thereof, but we, on another paper, are looking to assist residents, and one of the primary recommendations, as I see it, is to ensure their supply is sufficiently deep and has a sufficient pump capacity to meet that. So I'm careful not to promise something out of the scheme that the scheme is not able to deliver. Can we have a bit of a view on that?
And I would suggest, my position at this point is that I would prefer that the Sustainable Homes programme be kept to a domestic level and a singular dwelling for water storage, and that any collective initiatives that may take place that require a reticulation to a single board supply are perhaps more appropriately the responsibility of the TLA.
Sorry to pursue it, Mr. Chair, but it will be relevant later. I'm not talking about a collective, I'm talking about an individual from Ongaonga coming to us and saying, I'm going to put a tank in, I'm going to lower my bore, and I'm going to put a new pump in. My question is, does the scheme cover up to $20,000 the cost of that initiative?
It wouldn't cover it at $20,000 if you were reboring and putting pumps in and putting a water storage tank.
I'm asking, would we contribute $20,000 to it?
We would contribute up to 20,000 for water storage. So I guess taking your question, Mr. Curtin, the answer would be at this point yes, but we would need to look at it on an individual basis, I would suggest.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Chair, sorry to do this to you. Septic tanks. There's a limited amount or very little detail here about septic tank support. I'm assuming that if you've got a primary system, septic tank system, would that be in or out of the scheme? So we've got a broken down primary tank and I want to replace it. Would we support that? Alternatively, would we require the applicant to have a secondary treatment system for their wastewater?
The concerns that were expressed and the reason for the septic tanks being included in the Sustainable Homes package was that we are aware that there are communities that have primary septic tanks that are at the end of their life and may be producing leachate into the ground over an unconfined aquifer. We have in our consenting process and our rules a requirement that these be replaced. The Sustainable Homes programme was intended to assist in that process of replacement of tanks that need replacing.
Thank you for that. However, would it be consistent with our best practice requirements for wastewater disposal to insist that the applicant in fact install a secondary system as opposed to a primary system? Where do we sit with one set of rules and obligations on wastewater disposal, particularly for new installations which requires secondary treatment? How do we sit with this scheme supporting a primary system?
I would love Malcolm to answer that one for me from a consenting process point of view.
I think from a consenting process, we wouldn't be granting, generally we wouldn't be granting a primary treatment system, so particularly in the unconfined aquifer area. So we will be wanting a higher standard of treatment from a consenting point of view, but we wouldn't be directly connecting to the
So I appreciate what you're saying. However, I'm an example of this. I've got a primary system. I'd like to replace the tank, but I don't want to have to go to the vast expense of putting a secondary system in. Can I come to you, Mark, and say, give me $20,000 to replace my existing primary tank? Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
So just to follow, so if
There wasn't a conflict.
if we replace the tank in that way, does it
so,
require a
yeah.
consent? Or can it be replaced under the existing consent or no consent?
primary is probably going to require a consent, depending on location. So there's areas where it's any septic tank or effluent field is going to require a consent because of the sensitivity of the receiving environment. If that's considered to be less sensitive, there may be some tolerance for less particular treatment system. But generally, we've got the permitted activity rule is basically steering people to a higher level of treatment to be able to just go ahead and install it as a permitted activity. They need to be accredited systems that have been tested and are basically secondary treatment systems.
Okay.
I hope you see the tangle that it generates.
I understand that, and from what I understand from Malcolm, then the answer remains as yes, as long as you replace your primary with the secondary.
It's different than you said before.
Another offline.
Another offline conversation.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I'm happy to move, Chair.
Be a seconder to that?
I'll second.
Councillor Dick, would you like to speak to your...
No, I just I think this is a great move for the council to be assisting people to have more sustainable homes. So we're going through this process and it's really cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Councillor Dick?
I'll just make the comment that there are significant advantages in this, in the voluntary rate system for landlords or investors, and there's a high proportion of our housing stock now that is held by investors, for the simple reason that whereas they're in the nature of capital improvements generally, and of course they're tax deductible over the whole rating period.
In answer to that, I have a meeting set up with the Property Investors Group.
Well, I think you should.
And we're going to have a little chat about what's available to them.
Mr.
Anyone
Chair.
else wish to
Yes,
speak?
I do wish to speak, Mr. Chair. Look, no problem. I'm a great supporter of the scheme. I think it's a great initiative. However, the devil is in the detail in some of these things. This exercise is about accepting the criteria thereof, and what I'm seeing is a very permissive, individually focused criteria, which is fine, no trouble with that at all, but I'm suggesting that we may have to come back in a year's time after some experience under our belt to tweak the criteria to match the demand is. So that's the only qualification I'd put on supporting accepting the criteria.
The paper suggests an annual review.
All right, I would just add, I would hope that it in that year review that you were coming back telling us that you were just totally awash in applications and didn't know which way to turn first. The demand was just off the roof, and good luck on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Call the question. All those in favour?
Aye.
Opposed? No? Thank you. Delegations register. Has that on it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We don't bring the delegations register to council with any frequency, but any time it changes, it needs to be done through the council. So this is coming to the ENS committee and then forwarding to council. Circumstances here are that just simply the reorganisation has changed a number of titles within the council. So when our overall system was audited, that was recognised as something that needed to be brought up to date. So for that reason, this has been brought to council, basically to change the titles that sit within the delegations to make sure they're up to date and correct.
Any questions about this? Councillor Barber.
I just had one thing, is that the delegation implies, the definition of the word, that someone holds the authority and they then delegate the authority to someone else. That's what I've understood. So someone has the power. So with this in mind, who delegates to the chief executive? See, I would have taken it just as a matter that the chief executive would be able to exercise every power this council has, because the chief executive is the chief executive officer, and it's the chief executive who therefore delegates on the authority of the council to his staff, who are subordinate to him. So when I was reading this, I would have thought we should have had a line basically saying that all authority is held by the chief executive, who then, with the council's permission, delegates it to these people. I'm being a pedant here, I guess.
Well, I can answer that. Because the RMA basically doesn't allow a delegation to be further delegated. So in the delegation manual, we've made it that the CE has a delegation. He can exercise any of these functions that sit in the delegations register, but we cascade it down to a more operational level. But it can't be delegated to the CE for him to then delegate under the RMA.
So the delegation, the power sits with the councillors, and the councillors then decide to delegate it to these people?
Yes.
Okay. So that's slightly different than what the structure of the council is set up for in most other ways. That makes more sense.
It is a change to the RMA over time, so that wasn't the case earlier on under the RMA, but that was deliberately changed in terms of how the delegation applies.
So it's clear this council has the authority and it delegates to specific staff members for these powers to act on its behalf, even to the point of receiving papers.
That might be a different case. This is really dealing...
It's in your list here.
Simply.
I have to think about that.
I rest my case.
You rest your case. Councillor Bailey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Page 38, Malcolm, through you. Section 95, 95A, 95D, you've got there notification decision to be made by the manager consents in the first instance, yet the delegation sits right down with a whole bunch of other people. I'm a little confused. If the manager consents is going to be the first person to make a decision, why is the delegation taken down even further?
The manager might be away. This runs in a pretty tight timeline, so we've got generally 10 working days to make that decision from receipt of applications.
Yeah.
So the manager might not be there, so it could be that one of the other staff need to act in his place. There are a lot of, while we keep that sort of at a principal consents planner or senior consents planner level, there's a lot of very routine applications that would come through which can be processed or that decision can be made quite easily. But for consistency, we're sort of steering that it should come through my position in the first instance. But there will be occasions where I'm not available or away.
Okay, so that leads me to another question for James and Chair. If I'm a little concerned that we're authorising these delegations to come down in the instance where a manager is away on holiday or unavailable to make a decision. I would have thought that if a manager is unavailable for annual leave or sickness or whatever the case might be, then a particular person steps into that role on a temporary basis, and therefore they would hold that delegation for that period of time. So it kind of begs the question as to why the delegation is officially sent down further down the line, and what it's, if it's going to be made, if the decision is going to be made by manager consents, well then that's where it should stop, I would have thought.
So typically what would happen if somebody's away for an extended period of time, such as Liz being away at the moment and Malcolm acting as the group manager, is there is a formal assignment of those delegations, and that's something I sign off. If it's a short-term absence for illness or something like that, then that typically won't be the case. Your question, I think, is in relation to the public notification decisions. Look, I'm looking at these and frankly I'm surprised, because I read that as determining whether notification, so that's both whether to notify or whether to not to notify, that decision could be taken by a senior consents planner. Am I reading that correctly? Is that what's proposed?
Yes.
Right, so I'm surprised by that. I would have thought decisions on notification would have been made at a more senior level. A recommendation from a senior consents planner, absolutely. Yep. But I would have expected that to be at a management tier. So I'd like to talk more with the team about that.
Because there's a couple of instances of that appear through through the delegations. I mean, that's just one I pulled as an example. So if you want to go back and cast another eye on it, James, I'd be much appreciated.
So look, I would like to. The question for the committee will be whether or not you're comfortable just approving this today on the basis that we have further look at it, or whether you want to withhold that approval today subject to me reporting back. I guess just in the interest of business continuity, my preference would be just to put this through and then come back to you with any further discussion that's required, rather than holding it up, but that's over the committee to.
So it would come back to the next council meeting anyway.
That's right.
So why don't we just approve it today with subject to tweaking occurring, and that would be reported to us
at the next
council meeting.
Yep.
At the time.
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yep. No, because to be honest, James, I honestly don't understand a lot of what these delegations are about. Like I can't.
Sure.
But that one was one that stuck out for me. So I'm happy for that process to be used.
Sure. Okay.
So just helpfully suggest here, we've had a discussion on this before, and one of the times that it has been, there's been multiple lines for delegations of certain thing, it's been explained to us that there are various levels of seriousness of the applications, and that this is one way where things are seen as low level and pretty okay, are handled at lower level, but the more serious ones are handled at the senior level. And so there's an internal triaging process, and that's why we've had multiple layers of people doing things. Is that still the case?
Look, I think that's absolutely correct, but I think we just need to be clear that if that is the case, that it's reflected in the wording, and then staff understand their decision rights on any given occasion without any ambiguity.
Any other questions about this? Someone care to move we adopt this?
I move that, subject to the very wise words of the chair, and there's further expanding on the value of having a double discussion. So we deal with it once, and we can have time to tweak and come back and.
Just anticipated that you would love that suggestion.
I do.
Is there a second? Yes. Councillor Bevan, would you like to speak further?
Don't mind speaking. Thank you.
Councillor?
No.
Anyone? Mr. Bailey?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This issue of delegations was one that I particularly brought up with the public during the last local body elections, and I'm pleased that we're going through this process, and happy with the Chief Executive's suggestion that when it comes back to the full council, that he's had another close eye at it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Call the question. All those in favour?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, moving on, the compliance report.
Chair?
Yes.
Just as I don't know, we've got some guests here. Thought you might like to welcome one of the classes from Taikura Rudolph Steiner School. Come in to check out what we're doing. Just thought I'd say g'day to you.
Welcome. I hope we keep you interested.
Fall asleep.
We do have some exciting things coming up. Okay. Yeah, compliance report.
Yes. So this has been prepared by the compliance team. I was thinking Wayne Wright was going to be here. He's been overseas. He has come back, I think, yesterday, but I've just been texting him and he's not well, so he's not in today. So he's not here to lead this discussion. It is the annual compliance report, and there's some sort of in the front, just some of the milestones and the key numbers in terms of infringement notices, compliance, etc., matters that have been followed through on. A lot of detail in the report, and I would think that perhaps I don't propose to go through in any detail. I'm thinking you probably have read it and have issues that you want to raise through questions. So I'll leave it to you, Mr. Chair.
I guess to open this up, well, first of all, this is a relatively new report. This, I think, is the second time maybe we're getting this. I think this is a step forward from the last one. So in general, kudos from me. I did note a couple of comments here, and I'm pleased to see that probably this is Wayne's writing, I'm going to guess, has taken to heart that we want to be tough about things. And so in a number of places, for example, on page 65, the very last line on that page, the current owner of this company does not appear to have a high level of commitment to their environmental obligations. There's a number of what we might call editorial comments of that sort in the report, and be curious to hear what other councillors think of it. I kind of like the idea myself. But there are a couple of comments like that.
I liked it.
It's similarly on page 69, under discussion of Central Hawke's Bay District Council. It has taken some time to get to this point, and a change of CHBDC management elected leadership. So he's calling it like he sees it.
I like
which
that.
I guess is what we asked him to do.
Yeah.
I don't know if you all noticed, this report was the subject of a Marty Sharp article already, who's mined this for some of its kernels. But anyway, that's my opening comment. Anybody else like to question this report?
Wait, Neil.
Councillor Curtin.
You go.
Okay, right, fair enough. Okay, page 61, second line down, all 79 dairy farm operations in Hawke's Bay. I thought I saw a number somewhere else that said there were 90. I'm just a little bit, it's not confused, but I'm just wondering if anyone had any, because would that be, I don't know, whatever, I'll just make that comment.
Councillor, the number I have in my head is 80, and
Yeah.
so
So that'd be
79 or 80 thereabouts.
Okay, that'd be
But
right.
look, certainly all dairy farms that have a dairy shed require effluent capture and treatment and resource consent. So there will be operations that are dairy support that won't have necessarily those requirements, but anybody that's milking cows will require a consent, and we would be reasonably confident we're aware of all of them.
Okay. Page 63, again, this is just in the commentary. This will suggest that high-performing operators are maintaining and improving standards, which is really good to hear, while others may require further scrutiny from monitoring officers. So obviously they're the ones that are falling off the back end of the cliff and not performing as expected. I would have thought the use of the word may is perhaps not quite strong enough, while others should require or will require further scrutiny. I suppose that's just a personal opinion. I'll have some other questions or other comments. Page 67, the PanPac commentary. It was my understanding that PanPac has withdrawn the kiln altogether. Not only will they not be using it, but they're not going to go down that track as it is.
They've withdrawn it from that site and said they will take it away, trial the concept somewhere else, develop it, and then possibly something will come back.
Yep. Okay. So that's when you say to date the kiln has not been used, that's potentially what's going to happen there. What was the other comment I made was the truck wash inspections, which is not pretty reading for I think for that industry as a whole. Is anyone going out and talking to the trucking industry about that compliance issue with truck washing? Trying to nip it in the bud before we start getting red lights all over the place.
I can't say. I would think they are, but I could check that and answer that question at council.
Okay, and then just finally, and I suppose this is a continuation of what Councillor Belford was saying, really pleased about the comments around Napier City Council and the issues that we're facing and dealing with them or have done in the past. Hopefully that's it's indicated in the commentary that that the wind may be turning on there, and I certainly hope that it does.
Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to echo your view and opinion on the report. Great to see and good to see upfront commentary that is unafraid. So congratulations to the team for that. Can I start though on page 59 where you've enunciated the grading approach for your, if you like, traffic light scoring of the issues, and I'm taking it to significant non-compliance where consent holders have exceedances with measurable impact on the environment, reports not supplied, negligent or intentional non-compliance. So I'm taking that as the measure, and then can I take you to page 69, which is the local government section of the report, and in particular one of the local governors being the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. From your criteria, I'm just interested to know whether we should be on the red carpet or not in regard to any compliance or consents in regard to our stormwater discharges. Are there any regional council stormwater discharges that are non-compliant, non-functional, etc.? Can you assure us that that's the case?
I can't assure you. Just a conversation that's come up recently is asking the question of whether there are some particularly pumped stormwater that HBRC has control of that should have consent. There is a rule in the regional plan, sometimes referred to as the golden rule, crafted basically to give the regional council permitted activity rights for a lot of its flood maintenance, management, etc. activities across the region. So it sits there as a permitted activity. A lot of functions that the council does can fall under that, subject to conditions and subject to a code of practice that has been established for works and waterways. So a lot of activities have basically been carried out under that permitted activity rule since early days of the RMA.
I appreciate your response, but going back to the criteria, have we measurable exceedances that are beyond, that are in breach of any consent or compliance, even though it's a permitted activity?
Not on record.
Thank you. Continuing further to Central Hawke's Bay then, in which
Page?
This is on page 69.
69.
So we've got a red carpet in the previous year, 16-17, and you've given them an orange in the current year. Am I to read into that their current wastewater discharges do not have exceedances with measurable impact, that they are fully reporting and have no non-complying activities in regard to their wastewater?
I don't believe that's the case. I think there is non-compliance. So it's hard. I can't
Absolutely.
see that. Yeah.
So there is non-compliance, but that's been the subject of court order in terms of
appreciate that.
program of work.
Yep. I appreciate. I'm focusing on this report and the criteria that are set for the report.
Yes.
And I'm asking whether, in fact, we should be elevating them to the status of put them on the red carpet for the current year.
Can I just add? It seems to me the answer's in front of us here. In the legend, it says under the amber, moderate to technical issues, consents holder reports late, have minor exceedances over a period of time, moderate exceedances with minor environmental impact. So the technical officer has graded it as amber rather than red. So why would we want to go and put it something red when the officer has given it a grade?
So the specific issue in relation to the performance of the Central Hawke's Bay wastewater treatment plants are ammonia exceedances beyond that which is provided for in the consent. I think it would be our judgment that while that is non-compliant and it's a matter that we want resolved, it is a relatively minor environmental impact.
Sure. Okay. That's fine. I'm trying to get at the point that to enhance this report going forward, that we're very clear on what the criteria we're using to evaluate the outcome. This is a very useful report, and we should be using it to the max.
Would you accept, Councillor, that when you look at those grading where you started on page 59, significant non-compliance, the red also refers to negligent or intentional non-compliance. I suspect, given what Mr. Wright would have heard from us in the past, that we were equally concerned with the spirit, I guess, with which the territorial authorities approach their responsibilities in some of these areas. That he's elevated that, he's heard that, and elevated that as a key aspect of where he finally comes down on the grade.
I totally agree with you, Mr. Chair, but however, I would say that we ought to tweak the criteria to include actively engaging on remedying issues. Perhaps that might be a recommendation for the next year's report.
Sure.
Good.
Chair, I'm very comfortable that we review this before the production of next year's report to make sure that that some of the language is consistent across this. I just note that we refer to minor environmental impact and then measurable impact. Sometimes it's both measurable and minor, and so I think there is a bit of work to do just to make sure that the grading is consistent and it's defensible, really.
Yeah, that's essentially my point, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Anyone else wish to question, comment? Then we're down to, I guess, simply receiving this report. The recommendation is on page 53. Would someone like to move?
I'm happy to move.
Councillor Curtin, seconder. Councillor Bevan, any further discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I will comment, and the report is very welcome and ought to be furnished to particularly to our local authority colleagues, because the commentary on local authority performance around their consents, I say, is woeful, just woeful. It is negligent in many regards, and we ought to be raising this issue with the local authorities at every possible opportunity. These standards must be met. My concern and conversations with some public servants in those local authorities is of grave concern when those public servants say that it's acceptable to breach and willfully non-comply with their consents by discharging, for example, raw sewage into the waterways system, and that's become as an accepted practice by our local authorities. We should be concerned and greatly concerned with the red carpets that are being produced by our local authorities, and they also should be. And one of the benefits of this report I put to you, Mr. Chair, is that it provides us with an opportunity to confront consent holders with the reality of their obligations.
Councillor Bailey? Councillor Bevan, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So look, I guess I sort of feel the same way as Councillor Curtin, Chair. This is a really commend the staff on the format of this report. I think the colour coding system is excellent for highlighting issues, and it is such a shame when you look at this, so that the camera can pick it up. This is the local authority's performance over the past 3 years, and it's not good enough. It's got to be improved.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. On a similar vein, I'm really pleased with the report. I think it's really honest. I think it points out and names a number of different organisations that are not performing, and that and should be well known or should be known to the public. For example, under the dairy farming one, four relating to enforcement actions taken, 4 relating to excess water takes by Maxwell Farms. I've got to wonder, 4 times? That just tells me something's not right there. But I'd also like to congratulate the dairy industry for the increasing number of gold, silver and bronze compliance certificates that are given out. They've been increasing every year, and that's really pleasing to see. It just means that the top performers are doing the right thing, and that's really nice to see. But like I say, there's also a number of different industries or businesses that we've had some challenges with in the past who are now moving into the green, which is also really very pleasant to see. So I think this report indicates that our enforcement team is doing what's asked of them, which is being a lot tougher with people who are in breach of their consent conditions, and that the whole process of trying to work with these people who breach their conditions rather than coming down with them with a sledgehammer initially is working in a lot of instances. There are just some who are just not doing what they should be doing, and we now know who they are. Thank you.
Councillor?
I'd like to acknowledge the report. I thought it was an excellent report. I like the upfront, direct commentary that comes with it. I like the fact that it's unvarnished. It tells it as the reporter sees it, and I thought it was a very fair report. We get accused from time to time of not doing enough in the environmental issues and not doing enough to guard the environment, protect the environmental values of the region. Well, in the future, I'll point someone to that report, and so we'll read that. That's a pretty honest report. And I know it's critical of, no one can say that they've been soft on. It's some sharp criticism of Napier as it is of Hastings, a bit of a brickbat, bouquet for Central Hawke's Bay. So I think the reporters called it pretty fairly, and I was impressed.
Any other comments? Again, I would just add, I think it's terrific that we're putting something like this together, and I suspect there are a lot of individual companies that probably don't appreciate that this report has actually come to the place where it is in the granularity that it has, and that they are in fact being outed through a report like this in cases where they have been non-compliant with their consents. There are some concrete companies here and some transport companies that might be surprised to see that they're identified by name in a report like this. So hopefully the media will do a good job with it. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Schedule. Can we do anything? 10:30. All right, let's keep going. All right, Ongaonga Tikokino for issues.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a team of people. Simon's going to come up and get his presentation loaded. He's first. Team of people have contributed to the development of this paper at your request, Chair. Off the back of Mr Stevenson's presentation to Council on July this year. The report's in four relatively simple parts, starting with Simon giving you a bit of a groundwater 101 and where are we at with groundwater. Malcolm's going to lead you through some of the policy and consenting matters that fit around this issue, and then Mark is going to come back again and answer any questions there might be further to the sustainable homes proposition. So Simon will lead off.
Okay, so good morning, I think it's still morning. Simon, I'm part of the groundwater team, a groundwater scientist that looks after the groundwater level monitoring network. So I was asked to present a paper last week, and I hope I've given you the information you're after. I've just given you a summary of what our monitoring data is showing, a little bit of background around the well setups in that area, and I've touched on what happens typically in the groundwater system when you pump. They're all presented in the paper. So today I'm just going to quickly go over some of those things. Not using that, by the looks of it. I'll use the arrow. So, yeah, there's a quick illustration about the groundwater setting. It's very similar to Bridge Bar. Many of you know that issue there. I think Bill Stevenson gave quite a good account at the last meeting about the issue that's occurring there, and I pretty much agree with what he's saying around that setup that's going on. So I've got a wee picture there to help illustrate that perhaps a bit better. And then I'll go in and show what our groundwater level monitoring data around that area is showing as well. And then I'll just a general discussion about some of the long-term effects on groundwater levels and what the Tranche 2 allocation might mean to that. So, In Tikokino, Ongaonga, what we have are wells that are around about 30 metres. That's the average depth. I think when I looked at it, it was about 36 metres. So you may call them shallow, but they're not shallow like 5 or 10 metres. They're actually reasonably deep enough to have plenty of available drawdown. So I've just quickly plotted here roughly what the winter water levels are. So in our monitor well in Ongaonga, they sit somewhere around about 1.5 metres, but of course that fluctuates from year to year depending on how much rainfall we have and how much recovery we have over the autumn months. And then they typically decline down to around about 6 metres, and they have got down as low as like 9 metres in some cases. In terms of available drawdown, like I said, most wells are 30 metres, and therefore when the water level gets to 10 metres, in most wells there's about 20 metres of water available there. So I don't know what the pump setup is in Ongaonga. I can only assume that they are probably using surface pumps, because historically that water level would have fluctuated more in this level up here. So surface pumps can draw, it depends on how efficient they are, somewhere around about 6-7 metres. And it was never an issue historically because we didn't have much development. But as we develop the aquifer, what happens is we get increased drawdown in summer and maybe not as much recovery sometimes on winter, depending on the system and where you are. So over time, what appears to have probably happened in Ongaonga is that we've slowly lowered those summer water levels a little bit further and further, and those people that are just on that cusp with surface pumps are now starting to struggle when that water level drops below their intake. So not too different than Bridgepar that we've seen a good few years ago, and they solved it with reticulation. So, yep, water depth's generally okay, summer water level 5 to 9 metres, so there's plenty available drawdown. The question, as I said, is probably around the pumping mechanism and how they access that water. So what I've got here is just a plot of groundwater levels in Ongaonga. So this well is situated right in the township by the fire station there on Mill Road. It's 33 metres, so it's pretty representative of those wells going on there. And I've just drawn some rough lines there to give you an idea of the seasonal variation, how it's changed in time. We've been monitoring this well since 2004, so groundwater levels prior to that would have been different, and if I had to take a guess, I suspect you wouldn't have had quite as much variation. That would have increased over time slightly as we've developed the system. Again, that's quite a normal response to what happens in the aquifer when you pump it. So from 2004 to 2012, what you can see is the seasonal variation is around about 3 to 4 metres, somewhere between 1.5 and say 5 metres is where it fluctuates. It's pretty steady there. You know, some might look back and go, oh, there's a bit of a trend there, but it's not really strong or significant. And then in around about 2013, we had quite a dry year, and groundwater levels dropped to their lowest at that time. And that variation increased to about 5 metres, and it's sort of been sitting around there since then. Bearing in mind that the last 6 years have been quite low for winter water levels across Hawke's Bay, so we see a similar response in most of our monitor wells in Hiratonga and Ruataniwha, where the winter recharge over these years hasn't quite topped up. So it's been quite dry over those winters, which means going into summer, we've had lower water levels, which can bring things down a bit more. I suppose the only exception is this year, which is in Hiratonga, there is a slightly higher one, but we don't see it so much longer. Yep, that's cool. Tikokino, we don't have a well in Tikokino, so I've chosen the closest well I could find. It's about 40 metres deep. It's about 2k away. It's down Butler Road. And this well's been monitored off and on. So we started in 1992 and it was stopped in 2013. And my guess is it was probably stopped because you can see there's a whole lot of pumping interference. And when you're taking monthly dips, that's not so good for doing trend analysis and things like that. So it was considered not a very useful well at that time. So it was we picked it up again in about 2012 because they must have abandoned it for pumping and gone to another well. So it's been quite useful to see how the change in storage has affected this well. You can see that at the start, groundwater levels were much higher, around about 7.5, and they appeared to have, maybe declined about 2 metres over that period of 18 years, or 92 to 2018. I won't do the best. Too much to think about at the moment. And the seasonal variation here is about 2.5. So Tikokino, this is just a guess, we'll be sitting around about the same, 10 to 12 metres. It's unusual that we get like big, much different than those sort of levels in that area. Groundwater levels in the Ruataniwha probably range with an artesian head of around about 8 metres and go no more than 30 metres in around Ascot Road. That's where we get really large drawdown effects. You can see the pumping effects there. So that's Tikokino. So how's things look at the moment?
These are indicator wells you're talking about.
Indicator wells, that's right. The one in Ongaonga is right in Ongaonga, so it should be a pretty good representation. The one in Tikokino is at Butler Road, so it's a little bit further away, so it's a lot more of a guess as to what's going on there. This is just showing what's been happening across the Ruataniwha Plains in the last 2 months, just to give you a feel for what's it like going into this summer. So you can see in July, you've got green and blue dots. Green dots are normal compared to other measurements. Blue dots, like the dark blue, are highest ever, and the numbers in them represent how many years they've been monitored. So generally the picture for July was that, groundwater levels over the Ruataniwha were pretty good, pretty normal to above normal. But as you can see, there's been a quick change, and now you've got quite a mixed bag here. You've got some below normals, particularly around Ongaonga and Tikokino, and a mixture of normal and above normal, some record lows going on. So things are starting to change. And it's a bit like that for the Ruataniwha and Heretaunga. Things can change quite rapidly. It's really hard to predict what's going to happen in the middle of summer, because we can get a rainfall event and things can change like that. So things change quite quickly. This is the last side. So, what do we see in our monitored wells? We do have some long-term declines. That's, again, not an unusual response to groundwater pumping in the basin. There's a number of wells in the Ruataniwha that are showing that. What we do see is increased seasonal variation in those wells through time. Again, that's not too surprising when you think pumping's increased over time, so you're going to get increased drawdowns over summer as you get more pumping. What the model is telling us is that, the pumping component is such a small amount of the overall water budget. So that's saying that we're not mining. And what the model suggests is that when you do stop pumping, as in when you cap the allocation or usage to a fixed amount, it stabilises quickly, so those declines abate. But the issue I suppose we've got at the moment is that the pumping information isn't all that clear yet. So once we get that on board, it will help with the calibration and improving those predictions. So going forward for Ongaonga, I would predict that yes, you would probably see increased seasonal variation over time and some increased declines. And if you do take water from Tranche 2, both our modeller and the Aqualink, who are at the conferencing for the Plan Change 6, both agreed that that's the effect that would happen. You would get increased further declines in the groundwater level, springs and river flows. I will sort of state in there that it's not uniform, so that yes, overall you do get a change in storage, but the Ruataniwha system's complex. So some areas can gain, some areas can rise in groundwater levels, some can fall. It all depends on where you take it and where you put it on. So in some places you might take from a deep aquifer and find that you irrigate a shallow aquifer, and that shallow aquifer you might find that there's a rise over time, but the deep one is a decline. So it's not simple, it's complex, but overall, we would expect if you allocated Tranche 2 water, you would expect an overall loss of storage in the Ruataniwha Basin. And that was my brief presentation for you guys.
So, Chair, I'm happy to be guided whether you want to take a break and question Simon. Like I say, Malcolm has got some points I'm sure he'll raise, and Mark's available for questions as well, or whether you want to run through the whole lot and then come back to questions.
I think we can take questions now.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the slide about Ongaonga. The thing here, this is where it all comes around. Part of it comes about because of complaints from the people of Ongaonga, and it was a line was drawn between two dots, no water, and the council having given a consent to a dairy farmer not far away for a substantial outtake, a huge bore. And they thought that it was because of that their wells had dropped to an unseasonal low. So you don't have in there that on the timeline. The second thing which was another dot put on this was that there was an old water race in the area which was unconfined, and this was stopped. So there was a view that the lossage from the water race was filtering into the groundwater in the area, and therefore was making it easier for people to use surface pumping. And when the water race was gone, this was lost, and that's not in this either. So I think to help us make more sense of this, we would need to know when these two events occurred and whether or not we think that they have an impact on, because there is, as you can see, there's sort of a jump down here, isn't there?
Sure.
So I'm not suggesting, people have drawn the dots and said there's a causal relationship here. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just saying these are dots we need to be able to understand. Do they have an influence or not?
Yeah, I recall, I looked through that video that Bill was presenting on, and I recall he said that the race, and it would have to be double checked, but it was in 2003 that it stopped. Malcolm, do you have an idea of the consents when Plantation Dairies, it's quite a long distance away, the Plantation Dairy Farm, I'm guessing it's about 5-6k away, 5k away?
No, not that far. Paul might be
Not that far?
Not that far.
Like a couple K?
Yeah.
Paul's got it out.
So that the Plantation Road, well, 4830 is about a K away, I think, from Ongaonga.
4830 is a K, is it? Oh,
Yeah, and
so I
that
thought
got
it was
consent in 2003.
Like 2003 as well. So you wouldn't pick up the change since it was beforehand.
So 2003 for the Plantation Dairy consent. So when did they start pumping?
Assuming though,
Almost immediately?
probably immediately. We do have some. Malcolm asked me some questions yesterday, so I had a quick look at the pumping test there. So we have some of the pumping test available. We can look at the drawdowns and monitor wells. So when you do a pumping test, you have a main pumping bore, and then around it, you monitor the water levels, and that can be in the pumped aquifer and the aquifers above it. So you get to have a look to see what the response is, and from those responses, you determine what the aquifer properties are. So they're manual dips, they're not, the data certainly doesn't show a very clear response, but that's because of the mechanism. When you're taking manual dips, it's hard to be precise. When you've got a logger, you can get really minute changes on water level, and you can do it at a high frequency, so sometimes you can pick up those smaller changes. But I think from that, what it's showing is that the response over the time of the pumping test isn't like a large magnitude, so maybe it's less than 10 centimetres if it occurs. It's not very clear, but we have that data available. We can plot it up and show you. You can look at the quality of the data, draw your own conclusions from it. So that is there that we can get.
Just to go back to the summary of the fact. So in 2003, 2004, the open drain was was closed. At the same time, Plantation Dairy came on. So we have in here the log approximately another 6-7 years where there was virtually no change in the levels of the aquifer around Ongaonga.
After they've started, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that might be. That might be the response occurring. It could be. I mean, I don't think their response would be huge. If we were to try and estimate what that would be, you might be able to create a model to get a feel of the magnitude. What component of that variation, for example, is from just that particular activity, and what component is from the cumulative change from everybody pumping. It's not something you do quickly, but it's certainly something that probably could be estimated at some point.
Simon, perhaps just to help, I think what you said earlier was that the measured effect of the drawdown of the Plantation Road dairies at the time that the work was done was centimetres, not metres.
That's correct.
So it's likely that let's call it the cumulative effect of that take on the overall decline or fluctuation in groundwater level is not substantive.
That's right. Over that short period of testing, It's not substantive.
What time of the year was the testing?
probably winter, haven't had a look. But it doesn't matter in terms of drawdown. So
It's
whether you do it
effects,
in winter or summer, like it's just this, so you just add 10 centimetres on to the summer levels or 10 centimetres on to the winter levels. It all depends on the pumping rate and that for property. So the time of the year will just determine whether it's say 3 metres to 3.1 or 6 metres to 6.1. The amount of drawdown, the magnitude of drawdown still stays the same.
I guess the point I was trying to make, Councillor, is that it's highly unlikely that one take is having metres of effect on groundwater levels in the vicinity of Ongaonga.
Okay.
And I'll just add to that, and that's particularly for localised short-term effects. You know, it's really hard to predict those longer seasonal or multi-seasonal effects. You know, the change in storage from one particular activities you can't get from a simple pumping test and a short analytical model. That's when you create these bigger, complicated numerical models and try to take a guess as to, you know, how much is that one activity on the overall change over the whole time on those water levels. It's a lot more difficult to do.
And perhaps, sorry, just butting in again, it's just an important context here. The important thing is that we do have a groundwater model and that all of that work was done at great length through the Board of Inquiry process. There are screeds of evidence prepared to describe the overall cumulative effects of all of the takes on levels through the basin. So that's well known and well documented for us.
Right, so if I look at that bore log, it's difficult not to come to the conclusion that over time we're seeing a decline in the water level, both in winter and summer, and that the amount of decline in the water level you get in summer has been increasing. So when I read the papers that we've got, which I assume that you've also seen, it talks about the water level finding what's described here as a new equilibrium.
That's correct.
Which means that over time the water level can go down because of the effect of increased pumping, but then it will find an equilibrium and settle at that equilibrium. How do we know how long that takes, and how do we know that that's an equilibrium or that we're actually mining the resource? How the hell can we tell?
You've got to use a numerical model. So the numerical model provides a tool, and it doesn't say with certainty this is what's going to happen. It just says this is what we think is going to happen. This is our best guess. This is how we estimate it. So the current model says that if we kept groundwater usage at the 2010, I think, allocation was used, the 24 million metres cubed per year that was used in the model indicated that response was quite quick, that we should stay steady. But it's just a model. And, you know, we've got to keep improving the model, we've got to keep adding data on it, keep checking it, looking at our monitoring data to make sure it's correct. So we can only use models to just guide us as to what's happening. I think
So we can only actually tell what's happening by monitoring over time and seeing where the trends are taking us. So you mentioned 24 million cubic metres just then. Tranche 1 water is actually 28?
28.5, that's right. So
28.5,
during the PC6 hearing, additional allocations, Paul probably talked to this, were added on for permitted use. And why was it up from 24? And I know there's the permitted use that the commissioners added on and some other parts, but what was modelled in the numerical model was 24, well, the reports I read was 24 or 24.5 million cubic metres per year. Yeah.
Mr. Moe.
Yes, Simon, a question. Would you be available to come to Waipukaro on the 16th to present this to the Māori Committee?
Yeah, I can present this.
I say you rather than Ian because apparently there's a cross on his back.
Yeah, and then probably
I'm used to those.
On that, because you know this is a groundwater science, I'd imagine there'd be a number of policy questions and planning. So, you know, if that is the case, I'd probably recommend supported by policy and planning people that can answer those questions. We are just the science team. We're not involved in so much in the policy writing and the plans around it.
And I think also Mark's presentation would be relevant also in terms of the tank supply. Brian and I are probably one of the few people in the room that rely on tanks all year round, so we're, and Tom, so we're tank experts in terms of the drinking water. But also there's talk around town, Waipukaro, about the trench, is it tranche or tranche 2 applications? Is there some that are coming?
Probably better to...
Yeah. Can we come back to that question?
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Councillor Bailey?
Thank you, Chair.
I'm
Quite a
finished.
bit of discussion, I think.
Yep.
Okay.
How far back does the Onga well monitoring go?
That's it.
It only started in 2004.
Started 2004, yep.
That's really unfortunate, to
Yeah,
be honest, because it really, it doesn't really answer the question correctly as to is there any effect from taking off the water race or plantation dairies, because your starting point comes after that. The other thing you meant...
Excuse me, though, you've got other monitoring
sure,
pools
yeah,
around the area?
There's definitely plenty of other. So the earliest monitoring in the Ruatana first started in 1992, but for Ongaonga it starts in 2004. And from there you can get a feel for, how is the system responding to pumping. And I presented a paper in 2015 that looked at trends over time and the behaviour of those. And so, we do see some quite clear long-term trends and that's what's expected.
The unfortunate thing is, as I said, is the people of Onga came to us, but Bill came to us and said these what he thought were the things that were causing the issue, and we cannot prove or disprove it because we don't have a starting point that starts before the time that these things happen.
I don't think monitoring alone can...
Councillor, perhaps I could help. So we've just contracted recently a little bit of work to investigate managed aquifer recharge across the Rotanewha Basin. That bit of work will help us understand whether there is the potential for supplementation, because effectively the water races were a form of a managed aquifer recharge.
Yeah.
So
I'm not accusing
we're going to check out to see whether that's feasible and what effect that may have.
Yeah, I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just unfortunate that we can't go back any further than that, because that would prove, to me, that would make it a lot clearer in people's minds.
So we're going to take a break here, but where we are, I mean, just in terms of the words in the report, 3 places, 3 sentences. Over the last 6 years, measured groundwater levels during summer and winter have been lower than normal. Residents of Ongaonga may experience lower groundwater level conditions for longer periods in the future, or at least until a new equilibrium is reached, which we are confessing is guesswork as to when that'll happen. And then we say statistically significant declines within the Ruatana Basin for both winter and summer water levels were identified in this study done in 2015, looking at 1994 to 2014. So basically, while there's a claim that the system is not being mined, maybe we'll come back to that claim after the break. But the basic thrust of this is to say, look, folks, we have some really bad news for you. The water levels are declining historically. There's no reason to believe that they would recover from any natural cause that we can anticipate. But hey, you got a little bit of margin if you get yourself some better equipment. And so go out there and spend some money on better equipment and don't bother us. And that's an unacceptable position. And on that, I'd like to take a break. Thanks, Tom.